Mark Thorne thought he was untouchable. He was the king of New York real estate, a man who viewed people as stepping stones, and his wife, Eleanor, as a worn-out accessory he was ready to discard. He looked her in the eye on their 10th anniversary and told her to get out, sneering that she would leave this marriage with exactly what she came in with. Absolutely nothing. He thought he had the best lawyers money could buy. He thought he had hidden every asset. But Mark made a fatal calculation. He forgot to ask who Eleanor really was before she married him, and he certainly didn't know who was waiting behind the courtroom doors to destroy him. The envelope on the table wasn't a card. It was too heavy, too thick, and the manila color clashed violently with the pristine white tablecloth and the crystal flute of vintage Dom Perignon bubbling softly in the candlelight. Eleanor Thorne sat very still. She had spent the entire day preparing for this evening. She had gone to the salon, asking for the soft waves Mark used to say he loved. She had worn the emerald silk dress he had bought her 5 years ago, back when he still looked at her with something other than mild irritation. It was their 10th anniversary, a decade of life, built brick by brick. "Go ahead," Mark said, his voice devoid of warmth. He didn't sit down. He stood by the fireplace of their penthouse living room, swirling a glass of scotch, looking out at the Manhattan skyline as if the city were his personal chessboard. "Open it." Eleanor's hand trembled as she reached for the envelope. "Mark, what is this? The reservation at Le Coucou is in 30 minutes. Cancel it," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "We aren't going to dinner, Eleanor. We aren't doing this charade anymore." She tore the seal. The words at the top of the document seemed to swim before her eyes, but the bold lettering was undeniable. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The air left her lungs in a sharp, painful gasp. "Divorce? Mark, I don't understand. We just booked the trip to Aspen. We were talking about renovating the kitchen last week." Mark finally turned to look at her. His face was handsome, chiseled, and utterly cold. It was the face that graced the covers of Forbes and Architectural Digest. It was the face of the CEO of Thorne Developments, a man known for his ruthless negotiation tactics. Tonight, his wife was the negotiation. "I was talking about renovating the kitchen," Mark corrected her, walking over to the table and looming above her. "You were just nodding along, Eleanor, like you always do. You've become stagnant." "Stagnant?" She stood up, the silk of her dress rustling. "I gave up my career for you, Mark. I managed this home. I hosted your investors. I nursed you through the bankruptcy scare of 2018 when everyone else told you to quit. And you were adequately compensated for your time," he sneered, placing his glass down with a sharp clink. "You've lived in a $10 million penthouse. You wear designer clothes. You drive a Porsche. But that ride is over." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, checking a text message with a smirk that twisted his gut. "Tiffany is moving in on Monday." The name hung in the air like toxic smoke. Tiffany. Eleanor knew the name. Tiffany LaRue was his new brand consultant, a 24-year-old former swimsuit model with ambition that rivaled Mark's and a moral compass that pointed strictly to the highest bidder. "You're throwing me away for an assistant?" Eleanor whispered, tears finally spilling over. "After 10 years, Mark." "She understands the future," Mark said dismissively. "You represent the past, the struggling years. I don't like being reminded of the struggling years, Eleanor. I've outgrown you." He tapped the papers on the table. "Now, listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. My legal team, led by Simon Vance, whom you know is the shark of sharks, has ironclad this." Mark leaned in, his expensive cologne suddenly suffocating her. The penthouse? It's owned by a shell corporation you have no shares in. The accounts? They're in offshore trusts. The cars, leased by the company. Eleanor stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. What are you saying? I'm saying, Mark hissed, a cruel smile playing on his lips, that you signed a prenup 10 years ago. You probably don't even remember reading it. It states that in the event of a divorce, you leave with what you brought into the marriage. He paused for effect. And as I recall, Eleanor, when I found you working in that dusty little library in Boston, you had a beat-up Honda Civic and $300 to your name. So that's what you get. Nothing. I helped you build this company, Eleanor said, her voice shaking but gaining a strange, low intensity. I edited your proposals. I designed the logo. I introduced you to your first angel investor, Mr. Henderson. You wouldn't be Mark Thorne without me. You were a secretary with a sketchbook, he laughed. Don't rewrite history. Henderson liked my vision, not your coffee. Now pack a bag. You can stay in the guest room tonight, but I want you out by tomorrow morning. Tiffany wants to redecorate the master suite this weekend. Eleanor looked at the man she had loved for a decade. She looked for a trace of the shy, ambitious boy she had met in the university library, the one who had cried in her arms when his mother died, the one who swore they would conquer the world together. That boy was dead. He had been consumed by the monster standing in front of her. She dried her tears. The trembling in her hands stopped. A strange, cold calm washed over her, a demeanor that Mark had never seen before. It was a genetic trait, something buried deep in her DNA, dormant for years, now awakened by the shock of betrayal. You want me to leave with nothing? She asked softly. I don't want you to, Mark shrugged, checking his watch. I'm telling you to. It's already done. Sign the papers, take the check for $10,000 I've generously attached as a relocation fee, and disappear, Eleanor. Don't embarrass yourself by fighting it. Simon Vance will bury you in legal fees until you're living in a cardboard box. Eleanor reached out and picked up the heavy envelope. She didn't open it. She didn't sign it. She simply held it. Okay, Mark, she said. Her voice was void of emotion. If that's how you want to play it. There's no play, he scoffed. Game over. Eleanor turned and walked toward the grand staircase. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't go to the guest room. She walked straight to the front door, opened it, and stepped out into the cold New York night, without even a coat. Where are you going? Mark called out, momentarily confused. You can take your clothes. I don't want them, she said, without looking back. You paid for them. Keep them for Tiffany. I'm sure she's used to wearing other people's things. The door clicked shut. Mark stood alone in the silent penthouse. For a split second, a shiver ran down his spine. There was something about the way she had walked out, head high, spine straight, that didn't fit the narrative of a defeated housewife. But then his phone buzzed. It was a nude photo from Tiffany. Mark smiled, the moment of doubt forgotten. He had won. He always won. The rain in New York didn't wash things clean, it just made the grime slicker. Eleanor walked 4 blocks before she hailed a cab. She was shivering, her emerald dress soaked through, clinging to her skin. Passers-by stared at the woman in the evening gown standing in a puddle. But in New York, a crying woman in a dress was just part of the scenery. Where to, lady? The cab driver asked, eyeing her suspiciously in the rearview mirror. The St. Regis, she said automatically, then stopped. She didn't have her credit cards. Mark had likely cancelled them the moment the door shut. She checked her small clutch. She had $60 in cash and a personal cell phone, not the one on the family plan, but a burner she had kept for emergencies. She had never expected the emergency to be her husband. Actually, she corrected herself, her voice raspy. Take me to the Motel 6 near JFK, the one on the conduit. The driver raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. It was a long drive from the Upper East Side to the grimy outskirts of the airport. When she arrived, the neon sign was flickering, the O in motel burnt out. It was a fitting metaphor for her life. She paid cash for a room that smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. Eleanor sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress. The room was stark, no marble floors, no view of Central Park, just peeling beige wallpaper and the sound of planes roaring overhead. She should have been hysterical. She should have been screaming. But the cold calm was still there, anchoring her. She closed her eyes and let the memories wash over her, not to torture herself, but to remember the truth. Flashback. 12 years ago. She wasn't just Eleanor. Back then, she was Eleanor Blackwood, though she used her mother's maiden name, Eleanor Cross, at university to avoid the questions. She wanted to be an artist, to see the world through her own eyes, not through the lens of her family's empire. She met Mark in the library. He was frantic, his hair a mess, trying to print a thesis on a printer that was jammed. "It's the toner," she had said, fixing it in 2 seconds. He had looked at her like she was a savior. He was poor, desperately poor. He was on a scholarship that didn't cover food half the time. She started bringing him extra sandwiches. She edited his papers. When he couldn't afford the materials for his final architectural model, she found $5,000 and told him she won a scratch-off lottery ticket. She fell in love with his drive. He had a hunger that she, born into immense privilege, had never felt. She wanted to help him feed that hunger. When they married, she made a choice. Her father, the formidable patriarch of the Blackwood family, had disapproved. "He loves your wallet, not your soul, Elle," her father had warned. "He's a climber, and climbers step on things to get to the top." "I'm not telling him who we are," Eleanor had told her father. "I want to be loved for me. I'm cutting myself off. I'll live on his salary. We'll build it together." Her father had signed the papers reluctantly. Eleanor Blackwood legally became Eleanor Thorne. She buried her past. She stopped taking calls from the family office. She became the dutiful wife, using her innate business sense, learned at the dinner table of billionaires, to guide Mark, all while letting him think it was his genius. Present day. Eleanor opened her eyes. She looked at the cheap phone in her hand. Mark was right about one thing. She had signed a prenup. He had insisted on it, ironically, to prove he wasn't after her meager savings as a librarian. But Mark was arrogant. He had used a template he downloaded off the internet back then. He had told her to leave with what she came with. "He forgot," she whispered to the empty room. "He forgot that I didn't come with money. I came with connections." She dialed a number. It was a number that hadn't changed in 20 years. It rang once, twice. "This is the private line of Jonas Blackwood. Who is this?" The voice was deep, authoritative, and terrifying to most of the business world. To Eleanor, it sounded like safety. "Jonas," she said, her voice finally cracking. "It's Elle." There was a silence on the other end, a heavy, pregnant silence. Jonas Blackwood, the CEO of Vanguard Enterprises, a conglomerate that could buy and sell Mark's company 10 times over before breakfast, did not like surprises. "Eleanor?" His voice softened, losing the boardroom edge. "It's been 10 years. Where are you?" "I'm at a motel near JFK." "Why?" The sharpness returned. sharper than a guillotine blade. "Mark," she said. He kicked me out. He's divorcing me. He told me to leave with nothing." "Did he now?" Jonas's voice dropped an octave. It was a tone known in the financial world as the Blackwood chill. It usually preceded a hostile takeover or a corporate dismantling. "And does Mr. Thorne know that his wife is the silent shareholder of the Blackwood Trust?" "No," Eleanor said. "He thinks I'm just a librarian who got lucky." "I see." She could hear the sound of a chair scraping back, the movement of a man springing into action. "Stay there, I'm sending the car. Not a taxi, Eleanor. The car." "Jonas, I don't want to go back to Dad's house," she said. "Dad passed away 3 years ago, Elle. We tried to tell you." Mark returned the letters. "He said you weren't interested." The air left the room. Eleanor gripped the phone, her knuckles white. "What?" "He blocked us," Jonas said, the anger vibrating through the phone line. "He sent cease and desists to the family office. He told us you wanted nothing to do with us. We thought you hated us for cutting you off." A fresh wave of hatred crashed over Eleanor. Mark hadn't just cheated on her. He hadn't just stolen her youth. He had stolen her chance to say goodbye to her father. He had isolated her completely to control her. The sadness evaporated. The heartbreak calcified into something hard and sharp as a diamond. "Jonas," she said, her voice steady again. "Don't send the car yet. I need you to do something else first." "Name it." "I need a lawyer, not just a lawyer. I need a war hammer." "I'll get you Archibald Sterling," Jonas said. "But Elle, if we do this, we do it the Blackwood way. Total scorched earth." Eleanor looked at her reflection in the cracked motel mirror. The soft, supportive wife was gone. In her place was the daughter of a titan. "Scorched earth isn't enough," Eleanor said. "I want him to believe he's winning. I want him to stand in court and gloat. And then I want to take everything. Not just the money, his reputation, his company, his pride." "I'm listening," Jonas said. "Let the proceedings begin. Let him think I'm using a public defender. Let him bully me. When the court date comes, I want you to walk in." "Consider it done," Jonas replied. "Welcome back to the family, Eleanor." She hung up the phone. Outside, the rain had stopped. The next morning, Mark Thorne woke up in his king-sized bed, Tiffany draped over his arm. He checked his phone. No missed calls from Eleanor. No begging texts. "Good," he muttered to himself. "She knows her place." He dialed his lawyer, Simon Vance. "Simon, it's Mark. Fast-track the divorce. I want a court date in 3 months. She won't contest it. She doesn't have the funds to fight a parking ticket, let alone us." "Consider it done, Mark," Simon slickly replied. "We'll crush her." Mark hung up and looked out at the city he thought he owned. He had no idea that across the river, in a penthouse that made his look like a janitor's closet, his wife was sitting at a mahogany table, surrounded by the most terrifying legal team in the Western Hemisphere, plotting his extinction. The game had begun. 3 weeks later, the legal papers arrived at Mark's office at Thorne Developments. Mark was in the middle of a board meeting, presenting the quarterly projections for his new luxury condo project in Brooklyn, The Spire. He paused as his assistant, a nervous young woman named Sarah, who had replaced the previous one Tiffany had fired, walked in. "Mr. Thorne," she whispered, trembling slightly. "A courier just dropped this off. It's marked urgent. Legal." Mark smirked, gesturing for her to place it on the mahogany conference table. "Ah, the surrender. Gentlemen, if you'll excuse me, this will just take a moment. It seems my soon-to-be ex-wife has realized the futility of resistance." The board members, mostly older men in grey suits who tolerated Mark's arrogance because of his profit margins, chuckled politely. Mark tore open the envelope with a flourish. He expected a signed settlement. He expected a surrender flag. Instead, he found a notice of representation. State of New York, Family Court, Eleanor Thorne versus Mark Thorne. Attorney of record, Milton Weathers. Milton Weathers? Mark read the name aloud, brow furrowed. He looked at his chief financial officer, Greg Jensen. Greg, have you ever heard of a lawyer named Milton Weathers? Greg shook his head. Sounds like someone who advertises on the back of a bus, Mark. Mark laughed, a barking, cruel sound. He pulled out his phone and Googled the name. The first result was a website that looked like it had been built in 1999, featuring a lawyer in a cheap suit standing in front of a bookshelf of encyclopedias. The office address was a strip mall in Queens, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a discount vape shop. She hired a strip mall lawyer, Mark announced to the room, tossing the papers down. She's actually going to try to fight me with a guy who probably handles slip-and-fall cases at supermarkets. Maybe you should settle, Mark, one of the board members, Mr. Henderson, the very man Eleanor had introduced him to years ago, suggested quietly. Divorces can get messy. Public perception. There is no perception to manage, Jim. Mark cut him off. She has no money. She has a clown for a lawyer. This isn't a fight. It's a pest control issue. I'll have Simon Vance chew this Milton Weathers up and spit him out before lunch. But unbeknownst to Mark, the strip mall lawyer was exactly what Eleanor wanted him to see. Across the city, inside the sleek, glass-walled conference room of Blackwood Capital, the atmosphere was very different. The room smelled of old money, leather, polished wood, and silence. Eleanor sat at the head of the table. She looked different. The mousy, terrified housewife of 3 weeks ago was gone. Her hair was cut into a sharp, chic bob. She wore a tailored black suit that cost more than Mark's car. But most importantly, her eyes were cold. To her right sat Jonas Blackwood, her brother. He was a giant of a man, known in the industry as the Reaper, for his ability to dismantle failing companies with surgical precision. To her left was Archibald Sterling. Sterling wasn't just a lawyer, he was a legend. He had represented royalty, tech moguls and heads of state. He didn't have a website. If you needed to find him, you couldn't afford him. And at the far end of the table sat a small, nervous-looking man in a rumpled suit. The real Milton Weathers. So, Archibald Sterling spoke, his voice like gravel wrapped in velvet. Mr. Weathers here has filed the initial response. Mark thinks he is dealing with a bottom feeder. This will make him sloppy. He's already sloppy, Eleanor said, reviewing a file in front of her. I've been tracking the household accounts. Since he kicked me out, he spent $50,000 on jewelry for Tiffany, leased a new Aston Martin, and, this is the interesting part, moved $2 million from the company operating account into a consulting LLC registered in Delaware. Classic hiding of assets, Jonas noted, tapping his pen. He thinks because the LLC isn't in his name, we won't find it. Amateur. He doesn't know I know the passwords, Eleanor said. He never changed them because he thinks I'm too stupid to understand spreadsheets. Archibald nodded approvingly. We will let him continue to hide assets. In fact, we want him to hide more. Under New York law, attempting to hide assets during a divorce is perjury and fraud. If we catch him doing it enough, the judge won't just give you half, Eleanor. The judge could award you everything as a penalty. But we have to maintain the ruse, Jonas warned. Eleanor, you have to live the part. You can't stay in the penthouse here. You need to be seen struggling. Eleanor took a deep breath. I know. I rented a studio apartment in the Bronx yesterday, under my married name. It has no AC, and the radiator clanks." "Good," Jonas said, though his eyes showed pain for his sister. "And Milton?" The small lawyer jumped. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood. When you meet with Simon Vance, I want you to be incompetent, stutter, drop papers. Let him bully you, make demands that make no sense, make Mark believe he has already won." I can do that, sir," Milton stammered. "I'm actually quite good at being nervous." "Excellent," Archibald said. "The court date for the preliminary hearing is set for November 15th. That gives us 2 months. Eleanor, keep your head down. Mark will try to provoke you." "Let him try," Eleanor said, closing the file. "He's not fighting his wife anymore. He's fighting a Blackwood." The weeks leading up to the hearing were a torture of their own design. Mark was living the life of a bachelor king. Tiffany had moved into the penthouse and immediately begun erasing Eleanor's presence. She replaced Eleanor's antique furniture with gaudy modern art. She threw parties that lasted until 4 a.m. on Tuesdays. One afternoon, a month before the trial, Eleanor was walking out of a grocery store in Midtown. She was playing her part perfectly, wearing jeans and a worn-out coat, carrying 2 bags of groceries. She had to maintain the image in case Mark had a private investigator watching her. As she waited for the crosswalk light to change, a sleek silver Aston Martin pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. It was Mark. Tiffany was in the passenger seat, wearing oversized sunglasses and laughing at something on her phone. "Well, well," Mark's voice boomed, causing people on the sidewalk to turn. "If it isn't the ex-Mrs. Thorne." Eleanor froze. She tightened her grip on the grocery bags. "Hello, Mark. Shopping for... what is that? Ramen?" Mark sneered, looking at her bags. "I heard you're living in the Bronx now. How quaint. I hope the rats aren't too big." Tiffany leaned over, pulling down her sunglasses to inspect Eleanor. "Oh my God, Mark, is that her? She looks tired." "She looks like what she is," Mark laughed. "A nobody." He opened the car door and stepped out. He was wearing a bespoke suit, looking every inch the master of the universe. He walked around the car and stood in front of Eleanor on the busy sidewalk. "I'm going to do you a favor, Eleanor," he said, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "Because I'm a generous guy. Call off your joke of a lawyer. Sign the papers I sent. I'll up the relocation fee to $20,000. That's 2 years of rent in whatever dump you're living in." "I don't want your money, Mark," Eleanor said, channeling every ounce of her acting ability to sound weak and defeated. "I just want what's fair." "Fair?" Mark barked a laugh. "Life isn't fair, honey. Look at us. I'm about to close a $100 million deal with the city. You're buying generic bread. You can't win. Simon Vance is going to destroy you in court. He's going to subpoena your medical records, your diary, everything. He'll make you look like an unstable gold digger." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a $100 bill, and tucked it into the pocket of her worn coat. "Buy yourself a nice dinner, Elle. On me. Consider it alimony." He patted her cheek, a patronizing, humiliating gesture, then turned and got back into the car. The engine roared, and the Aston Martin peeled away, leaving Eleanor standing in a cloud of exhaust fumes. Passers-by looked at her with pity. A woman next to her shook her head. "What a jerk. You okay, honey?" Eleanor looked down at the $100 bill sticking out of her pocket. She slowly pulled it out. She didn't cry. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. "I'm perfectly fine," she told the woman. "He just made a mistake." "What mistake?" "He thinks he's the predator," Eleanor whispered as she walked away. "But he's just the bait." That night, Eleanor called Archibald Sterling. He approached me, she said. Did he say anything specific? He mentioned the Spire deal with the city, Eleanor said. He said he's about to close it. Interesting, Archibald murmured. That deal requires a rigorous audit of his company's liquidity. If he's hiding money in Delaware LLCs to keep it from you, his liquidity reports to the city are likely falsified. Exactly, Eleanor said. If we reveal that during the divorce proceedings, Archibald mused, the city will pull the contract. His stock will tank. He'll be leveraged to the hilt with no income. Do it, Eleanor said. Archibald cautioned. That won't just hurt him. It will destroy Thorn Developments, the company you helped build. It will wipe out everything. Eleanor looked at the empty walls of her temporary apartment. She thought of the letters Mark had returned to her dying father. She thought of the years she spent building his ego while he diminished hers. Burn it down, Archie, she said. Burn it all down. The day of the hearing arrived with grey skies and a biting wind. The New York family court was a bustle of misery, people arguing in hallways, crying babies, and overworked clerks. Mark strode in like he was entering a gala. He was flanked by Simon Vance, a man who looked like a predatory bird with slicked-back hair and a suit that cost more than most people's cars. Behind them was Tiffany, dressed in an inappropriate white cocktail dress, treating the hallway like a runway. On the other side of the aisle, Eleanor sat on a wooden bench. She wore a simple grey dress and no makeup. Next to her sat Milton Weathers, who was currently dropping a stack of files on the floor and scrambling to pick them up. Mark nudged Simon. Look at them. It's pathetic. Let's get this over with so I can go to lunch. Don't worry, Mr. Thorne, Simon Vance sneered. I'll have the judge dismiss her claims for spousal support in the first 10 minutes. The bailiff opened the doors. All rise for the Honourable Justice Marilyn Hart. Judge Hart was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had seen every lie a husband could tell. She sat down and peered over her glasses. Thorne versus Thorne, she announced. Appearances? Simon Vance for the petitioner. Mark Thorne, Simon boomed, projecting his voice. Milton Weathers for the respondent. Eleanor Thorne, Milton squeaked, standing up and knocking over his water cup. Mark audibly snickered. Judge Hart shot him a warning look. Mr. Vance, you may proceed, the judge said. Your Honour, Simon began, striding to the centre of the room. This is a simple case. The parties have a prenuptial agreement. Mr. Thorne is a successful businessman. Mrs. Thorne has been unemployed for 10 years. We have offered a generous settlement. However, the respondent is attempting to extort my client for half of his business assets, to which she has no claim. Simon placed a hand on the table. We ask that the prenuptial agreement be enforced immediately and the case be closed. Judge Hart looked at Milton. Mr. Weathers, do you have a response? Milton stood up, his hands shaking. He looked at his notes, then at Eleanor, then at the judge. Actually, Your Honour, I do have a motion. Spit it out, Counsellor, the judge said. I would like to request a substitution of counsel, Milton said. Mark rolled his eyes. Oh, for God's sake, she's firing him now. This is a delay tactic, Your Honour. Denied, Simon Vance shouted. This is an abuse of the court's time. Mr. Weathers, Judge Hart sighed. Who is the new counsel? Is he present? Yes, Your Honour, Milton said, finally smiling. It wasn't a nervous smile anymore. He's right outside. Milton stepped aside. The double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The room went silent. Walking down the centre aisle was not another strip mall lawyer. It was a phalanx. First came 4 junior associates in matching charcoal suits, carrying bankers' boxes of evidence. Then came a man Mark recognized from the news, Archibald Sterling, the most feared litigator in New York. But it was the man walking beside Sterling who made the blood freeze in Mark's veins. It was Jonas Blackwood. Jonas didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at the lawyers. He walked straight to the defense table, pulled out the chair next to Eleanor, and sat down. He took her hand and squeezed it. Mark stared. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Your Honor," Archibald Sterling said, his voice commanding the room instantly. Archibald Sterling, taking over representation for Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood Thorne. "Blackwood," Simon Vance whispered, his face draining of color. He turned to Mark. "You didn't tell me she was a Blackwood." I didn't know," Mark stammered. "What is going on?" "And," Archibald continued, "we are not here to discuss the prenuptial agreement, Your Honor. We are here to file a cross-petition for divorce on the grounds of adultery, massive financial fraud, and spousal abuse. We also have a motion to freeze all assets of Thorne Developments, pending a forensic audit." "Objection!" Simon Vance screamed, though his voice cracked. "This is ambush!" "It's not an ambush," Jonas Blackwood spoke for the first time. His voice was low, calm, and terrifying. "It's an execution." Judge Hart looked from the flustered Simon Vance to the stone-faced Archibald Sterling. She looked at Eleanor, who was finally looking up, her eyes meeting Mark's with a gaze of pure steel. "Motion to substitute counsel is granted," Judge Hart said, banging her gavel. She leaned forward, looking interested for the first time all day. "Mr. Sterling, you mentioned fraud." "Yes, Your Honor," Sterling said, opening the first banker's box. "We have evidence that Mr. Thorne has concealed approximately $12 million in offshore accounts. We also have proof that he has falsified liquidity reports to the City of New York regarding the Spire project. And," Sterling paused for effect, "we have the original copy of the prenuptial agreement. The one Mr. Thorne claims forbids my client from taking assets. However, Mr. Thorne seems to have forgotten Clause 14b. Mark gripped the table. "What clause? What is he talking about?" "Clause 14b, Sterling read aloud. "In the event that either party is found to have committed adultery, which leads to the dissolution of the marriage, the infidelity clause voids the separation of assets limitation. All assets become community property, subject to equitable distribution." Sterling looked at Mark. "And we have the text messages, the hotel receipts, and the testimony of one Ms. Tiffany LaRue's former roommate confirming the affair began 6 months ago." Mark turned to Tiffany. She looked horrified, not for him, but for herself. "You said the prenup was ironclad," Tiffany hissed at Mark. "It was," Mark shouted. "I downloaded it myself." "From a template," Sterling noted dryly. "A template that includes standard infidelity clauses. Did you not read the fine print, Mr. Thorne?" Eleanor stood up slowly. She looked at her husband across the aisle. "You told me to leave with what I came with," she said clearly, her voice ringing through the silent courtroom. "I came into this marriage with my integrity, and I came with my family." She gestured to Jonas. "Now," Eleanor said, "I'm taking what I built." "Your Honor," Sterling said, "we request an immediate freezing of all accounts." "Granted," Judge Hart said instantly. Mark slumped in his chair. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a notification. "Alert. Corporate accounts frozen. Vanguard Enterprises has initiated a hostile takeover bid for Thorne Developments." He looked at Jonas. Jonas winked. The trap hadn't just snapped shut. It had crushed him. The chaos outside the courtroom was worse than the silence inside. As Mark stumbled out of the double doors, dazed and loosening his tie, he was blinded by the flashbulbs of paparazzi. But these weren't the friendly photographers from the society pages he was used to. These were news crews. "Mr. Thorne, Is it true your assets have been frozen? Mr. Thorne, what do you have to say about the fraud allegations regarding the Spire project? Is it true you didn't know your wife was a Blackwood? Mark tried to push through them, looking for his driver. No comment. Get out of my way. He looked around for Tiffany. She was standing near the exit, typing furiously on her phone. Tiffany, let's go! He barked. She looked up, her face cold. I'm taking an Uber, Mark. What? Don't be ridiculous. The car is here. The car isn't yours anymore. Remember? She snapped, loud enough for a reporter to hear. And neither am I. I just Googled aiding and abetting fraud. I'm not going to jail for you. I'm calling my own lawyer. She turned on her designer heel, shoes he had paid for, and walked away into the crowd. Mark stood alone on the steps of the courthouse. He saw a black Rolls-Royce pull up to the curb. Jonas Blackwood stepped out, opening the back door. Eleanor emerged from the courthouse, flanked by security. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked straight ahead, sliding into the car with the grace of a queen reclaiming her throne. As the car pulled away, Mark's phone rang. It was Greg Jensen, his CFO. Mark, where are you? Greg sounded like he was hyperventilating. The SEC is here. They're raiding the office. They have boxes, Mark. They're taking the computers. Stall them, Mark screamed into the phone. I'll be there in 20 minutes. There's no point, Greg whispered. The city just pulled the Spire contract. The news broke about the liquidity fraud. Vanguard Enterprises just bought our debt notes, Mark. Jonas Blackwood owns our loans now. He's calling them in immediately. He can't do that. He can. We're in default. It's over. Security is escorting me out. Don't come to the office, Mark. They have a warrant for your arrest regarding the embezzled funds in Delaware. The phone slipped from Mark's hand and shattered on the concrete. The next 48 hours were a blur of humiliation. Mark wasn't allowed back into his penthouse. The locks had been changed by the bank. He stayed in a hotel, paying with cash until he ran out. His credit cards were declined. His friends, the friends who drank his scotch and laughed at his jokes, stopped answering his calls. He sat in a small hotel room, watching the news on a grainy TV. Breaking news: the collapse of Thorne Developments. How the king of real estate built a castle on sand. Eleanor Blackwood, daughter of the late Titan James Blackwood, has announced she will be acquiring the distressed assets of her husband's firm to protect the employees. She wasn't just leaving him. She was eating him alive. Mark had always believed that money was power. He had forgotten that true power wasn't about what you had in the bank. It was about who you were when the bank account was empty. And without his money, Mark Thorne was nobody. He had one card left to play. He knew Eleanor. He knew her heart. Underneath the Blackwood armor, she was still the woman who brought him sandwiches in the library. If he could just talk to her, just look her in the eyes, he could manipulate her. He could charm her. He could get her to drop the charges and give him a settlement. He cleaned himself up as best he could. He put on his one remaining suit, and he went to the only place he knew she would be. The rain that lashed against the pavement of Manhattan wasn't a cleansing shower. It was a freezing, relentless assault. Mark Thorne stood on the corner of 57th and Park, water pooling in his Italian leather shoes that were now scuffed and waterlogged. He had been the king of New York real estate. He had commanded rooms with a whisper. Now he was shivering in a suit that hadn't been pressed in 48 hours, staring up at the monolith of glass and steel that was the headquarters of Vanguard Enterprises. The building pierced the low-hanging clouds, a fortress of wealth and power. And somewhere on the top floor, sitting above the weather and the chaos, was his wife, or rather, the woman who was currently dismantling his existence. Mark wiped rain from his eyes and pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby was warm, smelling of white tea and expensive polish. He walked toward the security desk, trying to summon the arrogance that had carried him through life for the last decade. "I'm here to see Eleanor." "Mrs. Thorne," Mark said. His voice cracked slightly. The security guard, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, didn't even look up from his monitor. "Do you have an appointment?" "I'm her husband," Mark snapped, though the bite was gone from his tone. "Just call up. Tell her I'm ready to surrender." The guard looked him up and down. He saw the dark circles under Mark's eyes, the slight tremor in his hands, the water dripping from his nose. It wasn't the look of a CEO, it was the look of a desperate man. "Wait here," the guard grunted. 10 agonizing minutes passed. Mark paced the marble floor. Every time the elevator dinged, he jumped. He rehearsed his speech in his head. "I'll appeal to her heart. She's soft. She's always been soft. That's why I married her. I can mold her. I just need 5 minutes to remind her who we are." Finally, the guard waved him over. "Top floor. You have 10 minutes. If you aren't down in 11, I come up and drag you out." Mark straightened his tie, slicked back his wet hair with his hands, and stepped into the elevator. The ascent was smooth and silent, but his ears popped as the numbers climbed. 40, 50, 60. With every floor, his stomach twisted tighter. He was ascending to Olympus, but he was coming as a beggar. The doors slid open with a soft chime. The office was cavernous. It was less a workspace and more a sanctuary of intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city he used to think he owned. The furniture was sparse, modern, and terrifyingly expensive. Standing by the window with her back to him was Eleanor. She wore a white suit, tailored to perfection, sharp enough to cut glass. She didn't turn around when he entered. To her left, sitting in a leather armchair and reading a file, was Jonas Blackwood. "Eleanor," Mark breathed. She turned slowly. Mark stopped. He expected to see anger. He expected to see the red-rimmed eyes of a woman scorned. He expected screaming. But there was nothing. Her face was a mask of absolute, terrifying indifference. She looked at him, not with hatred, but with the mild curiosity one might have for a bug trapped in a jar. "Hello, Mark," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, and stripped of all warmth. "You're dripping on the Persian rug." I didn't have an umbrella," Mark stammered. He took a step forward, his hands held out in a pleading gesture. "Eleanor, please, we need to talk." "We are talking," she said, walking around the massive oak desk and sitting down. She gestured to a hard wooden chair opposite her. "Sit." Mark sat. He felt small. The desk was vast, a physical barrier between his ruin and her power. "I've lost everything, Eleanor," Mark began, letting his voice break. He knew how to play the victim. "The banks locked me out. The SEC raided the office this morning. They took my laptop. They took my passport. Greg told me there's a warrant being typed up right now." He looked at her, eyes wide and imploring. "They're talking about prison, Eleanor. Federal prison. For fraud." "Yes," Eleanor said, picking up a silver pen and twirling it idly. "That is generally what happens when you embezzle $2 million into a shell company to hide it from your wife during a divorce. It's called bankruptcy fraud. My brother tells me the sentencing guidelines are quite robust." Jonas flipped a page in his file, the sound loud in the quiet room. "I did it for us," Mark lied, leaning forward. "I was scared, Eleanor. The market was volatile. I wanted to create a safety net for our future. I was trying to protect the family." Eleanor stopped twirling the pen. She stared at him. The silence stretched for 5 seconds, then 10. "Mark," she said softly, "do not insult me. You didn't do it for us. You moved that money to fund a life with a 24-year-old swimsuit model named Tiffany. You did it because you thought I was stupid. You thought I was just the little librarian you plucked from obscurity." "No, that's not true. I love you." Mark stood up, desperate now. "Remember the library? Remember the sandwiches? Remember how we dreamed of taking over the city? I made you, Eleanor. I gave you this life. We are a team." Eleanor laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was dry, hollow, and sharp. "You made me?" she repeated. She stood up, and for a second she seemed 10 feet tall. "You didn't make me, Mark. You consumed me. I gave you my connections. I gave you my inheritance, channeled through investors so your fragile ego wouldn't bruise. I edited your proposals. I smoothed over your mistakes. I built the stage so you could play the king." She walked to the edge of the desk. "And when you thought you were big enough, you tried to throw me away like trash. You told me to leave with nothing. Do you remember that night? You stood there, drinking champagne, and told me I was worth 0. Mark slumped back into the chair. The fight was draining out of him. "I was angry. I didn't mean it. Please, Eleanor, I'm begging you. I can't go to jail. I'll die in there. Help me. Just make it stop." Eleanor looked at Jonas. Jonas nodded once, closing the file. "I'm not going to let you go to jail, Mark," Eleanor said. Mark's head snapped up. Hope, wild and blinding, rushed back into his chest. You aren't?" "No," she said. "I have spoken to the district attorney. Vanguard Enterprises has agreed to acquire Thorn Developments. As part of the acquisition, we are covering all outstanding debts and repaying the embezzled funds to the corporate accounts immediately. The fraud charges will be dropped. The warrant will be recalled." Mark let out a sob of relief. He covered his face with his hands. "Oh, thank God. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you. I knew you still loved me. I knew it." He wiped his face, a smile breaking through the misery. Okay, so we merge the companies. I can run the design division. I have ideas for a new tower in Midtown. We can turn this around. When can I move back into the penthouse?" Eleanor stared at him, genuinely baffled by his narcissism. "You aren't moving back in, Mark, and you aren't running anything." She slid a document across the desk. It was thick, bound in blue legal paper. "This is a sale and purchase agreement. It transfers 100% of your shares, assets, intellectual property, and rights in Thorn Developments to me. It also includes a permanent non-compete clause. You will never work in real estate in the state of New York again." Mark froze. You're taking my company?" "I'm saving the company," she corrected. "I'm saving the jobs of the 300 people you didn't care about. I'm buying the debt you created." "But what about me?" Mark whispered. "This company was my life. If you take it, what do I have left?" "You have your freedom," Eleanor said, "which is more than you deserve." "But I need something to start over," Mark stammered. "A settlement, a buyout. The company was valued at $500 million last year. Even with the debt, the brand is worth something." "The brand is toxic," Jonas spoke up from the corner, his voice deep and rumbling. "But we are generous." "Yes," Eleanor said. "We are paying you for the company. A fair market value for what you currently bring to the table." Eleanor reached into the pocket of her white blazer. She pulled out a single object and placed it on the polished oak desk. It was a $1 bill. It was crisp, green and lonely against the vast expanse of wood. Mark stared at it. The room went so silent he could hear the rain hitting the glass 50 stories up. $1? Mark whispered. You told me to leave the marriage with what I came with, Eleanor said, her voice low and intense. I came with my integrity, my family and my mind. I still have all three. She pushed the dollar bill toward him with one manicured finger. But when I met you in that library, Mark, you were a scholarship student on academic probation. You had holes in your sneakers. You had nothing, but you had $1 in your pocket and a lot of audacity. She leaned in close, her eyes locking onto his. So, I am returning you to your factory settings. You leave with exactly what you brought. $1. No debt. No jail. Just you and the world. Mark looked at the dollar. Then he looked at Eleanor. He searched for a crack in her armor, a hint of the woman who used to rub his back when he was stressed. But that woman was gone. He had killed her with 1,000 cuts, and this queen standing before him was what had risen from the grave. Eleanor, please, he croaked, tears streaming down his face now. I can't survive on this. I have nowhere to go. It's raining. I have no home. Eleanor stood up and walked back to the window, turning her back on him. Then I suggest you find a library, she said coldly. I hear they're free. Get him out, Jonas. Jonas stood up. He didn't touch Mark, but his presence was enough. Mark Thorne, the man who wanted to own the skyline, reached out with a trembling hand. He picked up the $1 bill. He crushed it in his fist, turned, and walked out of the office. The elevator ride down was a funeral. He walked out of the building and into the pouring rain. He stood on the sidewalk, soaked to the bone, clutching a piece of paper that wouldn't even buy him a cup of coffee in the city he used to rule. Passers-by rushed around him, ignoring the weeping man in the ruined suit. He was invisible. He was nobody. Up in the penthouse, the room was quiet. Jonas walked over to the wet bar and poured 2 glasses of vintage champagne. He handed one to his sister. He took the $1, Jonas asked. He took the $1, Eleanor confirmed. She took the glass, her hand steady. He's going to be destitute, Eleanor. He won't last a week out there, Jonas said, though he didn't sound concerned. Was it too much? Eleanor took a sip of the champagne. It tasted like victory. She looked out at the city lights, flickering through the rain like diamonds scattered on black velvet. He wanted a divorce, Eleanor said, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. I just gave him the most expensive one in history. She turned away from the window, turning her back on the rain and the man standing in it. Now, she said, walking toward the door. Call the contractors, Jonas. I want to renovate this office. I never did like the view from here. And that is the story of Mark Thorne, a man who learned the hardest lesson of all. Never mistake silence for weakness, and never, ever underestimate the person who helped you build your throne. He thought he could discard his wife like an old receipt, failing to realize she was the bankroll behind his entire life. He left the marriage with exactly what he deserved, his freedom and a $1 bill. Eleanor proved that dignity isn't about the clothes you wear or the car you drive. It's about knowing your worth when everyone else tries to discount you. What do you think? Was Eleanor's punishment too harsh, or did Mark get exactly what was coming to him? Would you have saved him from jail or let him rot? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal and ultimate revenge, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story. We drop new dramas every week. Thanks for listening. And remember, be careful who you step on your way up. You might meet them on your way